The devil's perfume was the first thing that hit you when you walked into the Red Moon Saloon. A foul trinity of cheap tobacco, stale sweat, and the kind of desperation that clings to wood and bone. It was a smell I knew well, a smell that had followed me from the battlefields of the Apache Wars to the quiet graveyard where I'd buried my life. For 3 years, Dust Creek had been my purgatory, and this saloon was its beating, blackened heart. I didn't belong here. My home was a 5-mile walk out of town, a plot of stubborn land where the silence was so loud it could drive a man mad if he wasn't already. I worked the earth until my hands were calloused leather and my back was a monument to old aches. I spoke to no one. They called me the hermit, the ghost farmer. They whispered about the fire, about the wife and daughter I'd lost. Let them whisper. Their stories were a wall I had built around myself, brick by painful brick. But tonight the wall had to come down. I slid into my usual spot in the back corner, a geography of shadows that knew my shape. The bartender, a man with a face like a worn boot, slid a whiskey my way without being asked. I let my fingers circle the glass, the cool bite a familiar lie of comfort. I wouldn't drink it. I needed my senses sharper than a new knife. My eyes gray and hard as a winter sky scanned the room, cutting through the haze of smoke and false cheer. There he was, Snake Eye Malachi. He sat at a poker table, not playing, but presiding. His bulk spilled over the chair, a cheap suit stretched tight across a body gone to seed from greed and rot-gut whiskey. The glint of his gold teeth was a beacon of corruption in the dim light. He owned this town from the cards in a man's hand to the fear in his soul. He was a predator, and tonight he was here to claim his prize. Then I saw her. On the makeshift stage at the front of the room, she stood under the flickering lamplight like a condemned angel. Clara Montgomery, 19 years old with auburn hair that burned with the same fire my wife's had. It was a fire I thought I'd never see again, a living ghost in a godforsaken saloon. She clutched the torn fabric of her dress, her hands trembling so violently I could feel the vibration from across the room. Her eyes, wide and terrified, were the same gentle shade of spring green as her. Emma. My Emma. My throat closed, a knot of grief and rage tightening until I could barely draw breath. This wasn't just some unfortunate girl. The Montgomerys, her aunt and uncle, were supposed to have protected her. I'd given them everything, vanished from her life, swallowed my own heart, and became a ghost, all so she could have a life free of the darkness that clung to me. And they had failed. Her dead father's gambling debts. I knew the truth. It was more than cards. Montgomery had gotten his hands dirty with Malachi's filth, and now his niece was being served up to settle the score. The auctioneer, a greasy weasel in Snake Eye's employ, droned on. A strong back for labor, a pretty face for whatever the winning gentleman desires. Do I hear $20? A few drunken whoops. A grimy prospector tossed a bid. 25. The numbers were an insult, a degradation that stripped her down to chattel in front of a room of circling buzzards. My hand tightened around the whiskey glass, the knuckles of my right hand, the 3 good fingers, and the 2 stubs turning white. The phantom ache, where my other fingers used to be, throbbed a grim reminder of the violence I had tried so hard to leave behind. $30. Snake Eye's voice cut through the murmurs like a whip crack. He grinned, that foul golden maw stretching wide. He wasn't bidding. He was declaring ownership. The room fell silent. No one would dare challenge Snake Eye Malachi. It was over. The auctioneer raised his hammer. $30 going once, going twice. Every instinct screamed at me to stay hidden, to keep the ghost of Ezra Blackwood buried. For 3 years I had watched her from afar. I'd seen her fetching water, I'd seen her hanging laundry, a distant beautiful ache in my chest. I had kept my promise. I had stayed away. But as that hammer began its final descent, I saw a single tear trace a path through the dust on her cheek. It broke me. Promises be damned. A father protects his child. The auctioneer's hammer was about to fall when every eye in that godforsaken saloon turned to the back corner. I had raised my calloused hand. The silence that followed was absolute. It was heavier than stone, so total you could hear the oil sizzling in the lamps. Even the dust seemed to stop dancing in the lamplight. Snake Eye's head swiveled slowly, his face a roadmap of scars and cruelty, twisting into a scowl of disbelief. His eyes, small and black as beetle shells, locked onto mine. He didn't recognize me. To him, I was just some dirt farmer who'd lost his mind. A laugh, wet and poisonous, bubbled up from his throat. "Well, well," he drawled, his voice a blade slicing the smoky air. "Looks like the ghost farmer wants to play." Slowly, deliberately, I rose to my feet. My 6-foot frame unfolded like a man who had spent a lifetime in conversation with the earth, all hard lines and coiled strength. I let my weathered coat fall open just enough. It wasn't to show a weapon, not yet. It was to show I wasn't cowering. My face was a mask of granite carved by grief and sun showing nothing. But my eyes, I let him see my eyes. I let him see the frozen hell that lived there. I pulled the worn leather pouch from my coat pocket. It wasn't heavy, but it held everything I had in the world. The clink of coins was an obscenity in the silence, each one a testament to years of solitary back-breaking labor. $50, I said. My voice was rust. The word scraped its way out of a throat long accustomed to silence, but it carried across the room with the weight of a falling monolith. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. $50 was a fortune. It was 6 months' wages. It was an impossible sum. I looked at her. Clara. Emma. Her eyes were wide, a battlefield where hope and terror waged a bloody war. A stranger had just thrown her a lifeline. But in a town like Dust Creek, a lifeline could just as easily be a noose. Snake Eye's smile vanished, melting away like tallow in a fire. He'd expected to make a show of it, to take her for a pittance and remind everyone who was king. This silent farmer hadn't just challenged him, he'd humiliated him. Every hired gun and lowlife in the room was watching, waiting to see what their leader would do. Pride in this world was more valuable than gold. It was paid for in blood. His fingers, thick as sausages, drummed against the fancy gun belt at his hip. "This town has rules, farmer," he spat. "Respect is earned with bullets, not dollars." 60, he countered, his voice sharp as broken glass. I didn't flinch. I didn't even blink. Before the echo of his word, thud, I answered. 75. The saloon erupted in a shocked murmur. The sound was like a rock slide starting high in the mountains. $75. It was madness. On the stage, I saw her knees nearly buckle. She was a prize horse, a plot of land, her future being bartered by 2 men in a room full of killers. Snake Eye's jaw clenched so hard a muscle jumped in his scarred cheek. He was a kingpin, a tyrant who ran the mines and the brothels, who owned the sheriff's badge like a cheap trinket. But cash flow wasn't his strength. His power was built on fear, not finance. He didn't have $75 to waste on a girl, not when his reputation was on the line. To lose a bidding war to a hermit, unthinkable. That's when I saw it. The shift. His right-hand man, Jeremiah Cross, a wiry killer with dead eyes, leaned in and whispered something. Snake Eye's face, which had been a storm cloud of fury, split into a cruel, knowing grin. The bid was over. The game had changed. "Tell you what," Farmer Snake Eye announced, his voice booming to fill the room again. "Let's settle this the Dust Creek way. the way real men do. He jerked a thumb toward the swinging doors. You and me, outside, right now. Winner takes the girl, loser takes a bullet. The room exploded. Shouts, cheers, the scraping of chairs. This was better than an auction. Blood was the only currency that never lost its value in this forsaken town. Men scrambled for the doors, their faces alight with a hungry, vicarious bloodlust. They smelled a massacre. My hand instinctively moved to my hip. For the first time, people noticed the worn leather holster beneath my coat. It wasn't the fancy pearl-handled rig Snake Eye sported. It was a simple, functional piece of leather, molded by time and lost to the shape of the Colt it held. But they didn't see a gunfighter. They saw a farmer with crippled fingers, a broken man who'd stumbled into a slaughter. They expected to see fear in my eyes. They saw something else entirely. They saw the cold, detached focus of a wolf staring down a rabid dog. I didn't come here to kill anyone. I said, my voice quiet but cutting through the noise. I came to buy that girl's freedom. Snake Eye's laugh was a hornet's nest stirred to fury. Freedom, he roared. Boy, the only freedom in Dust Creek comes from the barrel of a gun. Pay with lead or pay with gold, it makes no difference to me. He was already moving, swaggering toward the street. But as the crowd surged around me, I caught her eye. Just for a second, our gazes locked. And in that moment, I let her see it. Not the hunger I knew she feared in men's eyes. Not the pity of a stranger. I let her see what a daughter is supposed to see in her father's face. Protection. Then she saw my hand. As my fingers brushed against the worn wooden grip of my Colt, she saw the 2 missing digits, the slight, almost imperceptible tremor in the ones that remained. Her face paled. The flicker of hope in her eyes was extinguished, replaced by the certainty of my death. How could a crippled man possibly outdraw the fastest gun in 3 counties? It was a question I had asked myself 1,000 times in the dark of night. Today, I was going to find out the answer. The dusty street outside the Red Moon Saloon was a theater of death. Word had spread like a plague, and the town had turned out for the spectacle. Windows slammed open above us, filled with ghoulishly curious faces. Doors creaked ajar. In minutes, it seemed half of Dust Creek had gathered to watch what they all assumed would be my funeral. Snake Eye strutted into the center of the street, a peacock of violence. The spurs on his boots jingled a tinny, arrogant rhythm. He bathed in the attention puffing out his chest. I could see the notches on the grip of his pearl-handled Colt. 12 men. He thought I would be the 13th. Last chance to walk away, farmer, he called out, his voice dripping with mock sympathy. Leave your money on the ground and crawl back to your cornfield. Maybe I'll let you live to plant another season. I stepped into the street. My boots made no sound in the thick dust. The afternoon sun was a merciless eye in the sky, casting long skeletal shadows between us. I found my spot, the one that felt right. My gait was steady. There was no hesitation. I had made my peace with God a long time ago in the smoldering ruins of my home. Whatever came next was just an epilogue. From the saloon doorway, I could see Clara Emma, her hand pressed to her mouth, her heart hammering a frantic beat I could almost hear. Old Pete the blacksmith, a man whose anvil was more honest than any citizen here, shouted from the crowd. $20, says the farmer, don't even clear leather. Laughter rippled through the spectators. It died as they got a closer look at my face. The mask was gone. The cold focus in my steel-gray eyes was not of a farmer, but of a hunter. They saw a man who had not only walked this road before, but had paved it with the bodies of his enemies. Snake Eye saw it too. For the first time, a flicker of something, not fear, but uncertainty crossed his features. That swagger faltered for a half step. "You look familiar, farmer," he said, his voice lower now, testing the air. "Have we met somewhere before?" The silence was absolute again. My voice when I spoke was barely a whisper, yet it carried across the street like a clap of thunder. Fort Apache. The name hung in the air, a ghost of a massacre. 7 years ago, I continued, my eyes boring into his. "You rode with the Crimson Ridge gang." The color drained from Snake Eye's face. It was as if I'd reached into his chest and squeezed his heart. Fort Apache wasn't just a robbery. It was an extermination. 30 cavalry soldiers dead, a supply train plundered, and witnesses systematically eliminated. All but one. A young cavalry sergeant who'd played dead amongst the corpses of his comrades. His face pressed into the blood-soaked dirt, burning the faces of the killers into his memory. "You're him." Snake Eye breathed the words stolen from his lungs. The pieces were clicking into place behind his eyes, forming a picture he did not want to see. "You're the soldier. The one who testified." My crippled hand moved the 3 remaining fingers, resting lightly, reverently, on the grip of my Colt. "Sergeant Ezra Blackwood, 5th Cavalry." I confirmed, my voice as cold and final as a gravestone. "And I remember your face when you shot my commanding officer in the back." The entire dynamic of the street shifted. The air crackled. This wasn't a gunfight over a girl anymore. This was a reckoning. This was justice long delayed, arriving on dusty boots. The crowd sensed it. This was no dirt farmer. This was a trained soldier, a combat veteran with a personal vendetta. The odds didn't look so long anymore. Snake Eye's confidence shattered. The stories about that sergeant's marksmanship, once distant legends, were now standing 20 paces away from him. A fair fight was suicide. And Snake Eye Malachi was above all else a survivor. His eyes darted a tiny, frantic movement. They flicked toward the rooftop of the general store across the street. I saw it. An almost imperceptible nod to Jeremiah Cross, who I now saw was positioned there, a rifle cradled in his arms. Snake Eye never intended to fight fair. "Draw." I roared, not at him, but as a warning. But a woman's scream cut through the air first. Clara's. She had seen him too. Her warning was a heartbeat too late for a normal man. The crack of the rifle split the afternoon silence. But I was not a normal man. My body reacted before my mind could process the danger. I dove sideways, fueled by years of combat instinct. The world compressed into a tunnel of slow motion. I felt the heat of the bullet as it tore through the air where my heart had been, a second before splintering the wooden post behind me with a deafening thud. The crowd scattered like startled birds. I hit the ground, rolling through the dust, not with the clumsiness of a farmer, but with the fluid grace of a man whose life had depended on such movements. I came up on one knee, my Colt already in my hand, seemingly having materialized there. The worn grip felt like an extension of my own arm. My first shot was for the roof. I didn't aim for the chest, I aimed for the head. The distance was nearly impossible for a handgun, but my sight was true. The crack of my Colt was followed a second later by the sight of Jeremiah Cross dropping from his perch like a discarded doll. Snake Eye cursed, his face a mask of shock and rage, fumbling for his own gun. But years of soft living and cheap whiskey had dulled his reflexes. My second shot was a masterpiece of cruel precision. It shattered his wrist before his pearl-handled Colt even cleared leather. The gun flew from his grasp, spinning end over end before clattering into the dust. I rose to my feet, advancing slowly, my gun trained on his chest. "Should have fought fair," I said, my voice low and dangerous. The nightmare, however, wasn't over. 2 more of Snake Eye's thugs burst from the general store, their rifles already leveled at my back. It was a kill box. The whole street was an ambush. I was trapped. Clara watched in renewed horror, her hope crumbling to dust once more. That's when the impossible happened. Enough. The voice belonged to Doc Patterson, the town's elderly physician. He stepped out from behind a water trough, his worn medical bag clutched in his hand like a shield. He walked directly into the line of fire. This man, he shouted, his voice quavering but defiant, pointing a wrinkled finger at me, saved my grandson's life at Fort Apache. He was one of the soldiers who held the line. I will not stand by and watch you murder him like a pack of dogs. It was a crack in the dam of fear that had held Dust Creek captive for years. One by one, others emerged. Martha Jenkins, the boarding house owner, appeared in her doorway holding an ancient shotgun. Young Tommy Wright, barely 16, stepped out from an alley, gripping a rusty pitchfork like a spear. Then the final stone in the foundation of Snake Eye's power crumbled. Sheriff Morrison, a man who had been Snake Eye's puppet for 2 years, slowly, hesitantly drew his own weapon. He pointed it not at me, but at the 2 remaining outlaws. "Doc's right," the sheriff said, his voice shaking, but loud enough for all to hear. "We've lived in fear long enough." Snake Eye stared at the rebellion unfolding, clutching his shattered wrist, blood seeping through his fingers. He couldn't believe it. His empire of fear was collapsing. "You fools," he snarled. "You kill me and my brother's gang will burn this town to ash. I'd heard enough." I crossed the remaining distance in 3 strides, grabbed him by his vest, and hauled him upright. The muzzle of my Colt pressed hard against his temple. "Your brother's dead," I lied, the words coming out smooth and cold as river stones. "Hung for murder in Tombstone last month." I should know. I was there to watch. The lie struck home. It was a calculated risk, a psychological blow meant to sever his last remaining lifeline. I saw the uncertainty flicker in his men's eyes. Their rifles wavered. Without their leader's reputation, without the promise of backup, they were just common thugs facing an entire town that was armed, angry, and had just found its spine. "Here's what's going to happen," I announced, my voice a commanding crackle that cut across the street. "You and your men are going to get on your horses. You are going to ride out of Dust Creek, and you are never ever going to come back." I leaned in closer, my voice dropping to a private, venomous whisper for his ears only. "In return, I won't tell the territorial marshal exactly which rock you've crawled under. Now get." But as I looked into Snake Eye's eyes, I didn't see surrender. I saw the desperate, hateful cunning of a cornered rattlesnake. Even beaten, bleeding, and alone, he was still dangerous. And in that moment, I realized the horrible truth: my mercy might be the very thing that destroyed us all. A broken laugh like grinding stones rattled in Snake Eye's chest as he cradled his shattered wrist. "You think this ends here, soldier boy?" He wheezed, his eyes burning with a feverish intensity. "You think mercy makes you a hero?" My gun remained steady, but a war was raging inside me. Every instinct, honed by years of survival, screamed at me to pull the trigger. End it. End the threat. But I could feel the eyes of the town on me. I could feel her eyes on me. To kill him now, a wounded, disarmed man, would make me a murderer in front of them, in front of my daughter. But to let him live, he would be back. He would come back with a legion of devils, and he would burn this town and everyone in it to the ground. The girl. Snake Eye continued, his voice gaining a malicious strength as he saw the conflict in my face. "Sweet little Clara, you think saving her makes you noble? But you don't know what her dear dead daddy really owed me money for? Do you?" Clara's face went white. "Don't listen to him, Ezra," she pleaded. But Snake Eye was a master of poison. "Tell him, darling," he grinned, blood flecking his lips. "Tell him about the Chinese workers your papa sold to the mine owners, like cattle. Tell him about the families that died in those collapsed tunnels because of the information he gave us. The word struck Clara like a physical blow. I felt her recoil as if she'd been shot. The gambling debts. They were blood money. Payments for her father's betrayal. Men, women, children dead because of the man she had been raised to love. That's why she's here. Snake Eye wheezed, his victory assured. A blood debt. Her daddy sold souls, so his daughter pays the price. That's frontier justice, soldier. That's the law of this land. The whispers started again among the townspeople. Their newfound courage was a fragile thing, and Snake Eye's words were a heavy stone threatening to shatter it. Son Doc Patterson said, stepping closer, "Sometimes mercy is just justice delayed, and sometimes justice wears the mask of mercy. The choice is yours." But Clara had heard enough. Tears streamed down her face, but her chin was held high. With a strength that stunned me, she walked into the space between us. "If my father's sins condemn me, then I will bear that burden," she declared, her voice ringing across the street. "But I will not let you become a murderer to save my life. My father made evil choices. That doesn't make this man's mercy wrong. Ezra Blackwood risked his life for my freedom. I won't let that sacrifice be poisoned by more killing." Snake Eye's eyes narrowed. The girl was ruining everything. Noble words from a dead girl walking. Her words, though, her courage. It settled the war inside me. I had made my decision. I lowered my Colt. "You have 1 hour," I said, my voice carrying the weight of finality. "Collect your men and ride out. If I ever see your face in this territory again, mercy will not be an option." A smile of pure poison spread across Snake Eye's face as he struggled to his feet. "You just signed everyone's death warrant, farmer," he whispered. "Sweet dreams." He stumbled away, his men falling in behind him. But he wasn't heading for his horse. As he moved past the general store, past the silent watching crowd, I saw his trajectory. And a cold dread, colder than any I had ever known, seized my heart. He was heading straight for the small wooden building on the edge of the square. The schoolhouse. The schoolhouse. Clara whispered, her voice tight with dawning horror. All the children. Miss Henderson took them to hide in the schoolhouse. I spun around just as Snake Eye kicked the door open. My blood ran cold. In his good hand he held a derringer he must have had hidden in his boot. Small but lethal at close range. "New Deal, farmer," he shrieked, his body blocking the doorway. "I take one of the kids with me. Insurance. You follow me, they all die. You let me ride out peaceful-like, and maybe I don't paint these walls red." Through the open door I could see them. A cluster of tiny, terrified faces. Tommy Wright's little sister Sarah. The Patterson twins. The preacher's boy no older than 5. Miss Henderson, their teacher, stood in front of them, a frail but determined shield. "You're a special kind of evil," I said, my voice deadly quiet. Snake Eye laughed, a ragged, unhinged sound. "I'm a survivor. Something you're about to learn ain't the same as being a hero." The townspeople froze behind me. One wrong move and the schoolhouse would become a slaughterhouse. That's when Clara did something that stopped my heart. She started walking toward him. "I'll go with you," she called out, her voice clear and strong. "Take me instead. Leave the children." "Clara, no." I grabbed her arm, but she pulled it free with surprising strength. "This started because of my father's debts," she said, her eyes locked on mine. "It should end with me paying them." Snake Eye considered it, his scarred face a mask of twisted calculation. The girl was valuable. It was tempting. But then little Sarah Wright, barely 7 years old, stepped out from behind her teacher. "Mister," she said, her small voice cutting through the tension like a silver bell. "You're hurt real bad." My mama says sometimes hurt people do mean things because they're scared. The innocence of it was a physical force. It stunned the entire street into silence. Even Snake Eye hesitated, his hateful gaze fixed on this tiny child, offering him compassion. "Sarah, get back," Miss Henderson whispered urgently, but the girl continued, her voice unwavering. "If you're scared, you can stay for supper. Mama always says nobody should face their troubles on an empty stomach." For one impossible fragile moment, something human flickered in Snake Eye's eyes. A crack appeared in the armor of a lifetime of hate. That was all the opening I needed. I moved faster than anyone thought possible. The world snapped back into sharp, blinding focus. My damaged hand was steady as a rock as I raised the Colt-sighted and fired a single precise shot. The Derringer flew from Snake Eye's grip, spinning away into the dirt. He collapsed, clutching a new wound in his shoulder. But as I rushed forward, I didn't see his final spiteful act. From inside his vest, he pulled a small stick of dynamite. With his remaining strength, he pulled the pin with his teeth. "If I can't have this town," he wheezed, "nobody can." The hiss of the burning fuse was the sound of a striking snake. A death sentence. I had maybe 5 seconds before the schoolhouse, and everyone in it was turned into splinters and corpses. "Everyone out now," I roared, diving through the doorway. Miss Henderson reacted instantly, shoving children toward the windows. I threw myself at Snake Eye, my fingers grasping for the dynamite. But he clutched it to his chest, like a beloved child, his eyes wild with the madness of a man taking the whole world with him. 3 seconds, he whispered through a bloody grin. "Say your prayers." A figure appeared in the doorway. Clara. My heart stopped. She took in the scene in a single glance, me, Snake Eye, the hissing fuse. And she made a choice. Instead of running, she lunged forward. She wrapped her arms around Snake Eye's torso, pinning the dynamite between her body and his. "If you want to kill children," she said, her voice shaking, but unbreakable, "you'll have to go through me first." 2 seconds. My mind was a maelstrom of impossible calculations. I couldn't reach the fuse. I couldn't pull her away without detonating it. But maybe I could change its direction. 1 second. With a surge of adrenaline-fueled strength I didn't know I possessed, I grabbed both of them, Clara and Snake Eye. I wasn't trying to separate them. I was trying to move them. I roared, heaving all 3 of us sideways toward the thick stone foundation in the corner of the schoolhouse. As we hit the ground in a tangle of limbs, I twisted my body, forcing myself on top my back to the dynamite, my arms wrapped around her. A final desperate shield. Snake Eye's eyes went wide as he realized his final act of revenge was only going to kill himself. The world dissolved into a deafening roar and a wave of pure white-hot force. The corner of the schoolhouse imploded, burying us under a ton of splintered wood and broken stone. Then there was only darkness. Silence. A terrifying, profound silence, like the one that hangs over a fresh grave. Then coughing. The crying of children. Shouts. The sound of people digging, clawing at the wreckage. Light broke through. Doc Patterson was the first face I saw, his features grim as he pulled away boards. "Here, they're here." Clara emerged first, covered in dust, coughing, but alive. My body had created a small pocket, taking the worst of the blast. I felt a dozen different kinds of pain, a warm trickle of blood from my head, the crushing weight of a beam across my back. But I was breathing. Snake Eye Malachi was not. His reign of terror had been ended by his own hatred. As Doc worked on me, Clara knelt by my side, and as she reached to check my pulse, her fingers brushed against something hard beneath my shirt. She pulled it free. It was a small, faded photograph, protected from the world by a leather pouch. Her gasp was a tiny wounded sound. She was staring at the face of a young woman with auburn hair and gentle green eyes. A face she had never seen, but one she knew from her own reflection. On the back in faded ink were words I had written an eternity ago, my beloved daughter Emma. May you find the happiness I couldn't give you. Love always, Papa. Her hands trembled. The truth, more explosive than any dynamite, crashed over her. You found it, didn't you? Doc. Patterson's voice was soft, heavy with old sorrows. I wondered when the truth would finally come out. You knew, Clara whispered, her eyes never leaving my face. The old doctor nodded sadly. I delivered you 19 years ago. Your real name isn't Clara Montgomery. It's Emma Blackwood. When we lost so many to the influenza, your father, he thought you'd be safer away from him. He moved out here, told everyone his wife and daughter had perished in a fire. A lie to protect you. My eyes fluttered open. The world swam back into focus. The first thing I saw was her face streaked with dirt and tears. She was holding the photograph. There were no more walls, no more lies, no more shadows to hide in. Tears, hot and foreign, streamed down my own dust-covered cheeks. Emma, I whispered, my voice breaking. My little girl. The question came torn from the depths of her soul. Why? Her voice broke. Why did you let me believe you were dead? Why did you let me grow up thinking I was alone? I struggled to sit up, a groan of pain escaping my lips. Because I was broken, I confessed the words raw and jagged. After your mother died, after what I saw in the war, the darkness in me, I wasn't fit to raise a child. The Montgomerys, they were good people then. I thought you'd have a better life, a life without my ghosts. A slow understanding dawned in her eyes. But you've been watching me. All these years, you never really left. I nodded, the simple movement and agony from a distance. When I heard what had happened, the debts, when I found out what snake I planned, my voice hardened. I couldn't let my failures destroy your life a second time. Around us, Dust Creek was already coming back to life. Sheriff Morrison approached, his badge glinting. Ezra, he began, the territorial marshal will want a word. About the Crimson Ridge gang. There's a substantial reward. I wasn't listening. My world had narrowed to the face of my daughter. 19 years of regret, shame, and a love so fierce it had almost killed me were warring in my expression. Emma, I said, my voice thick with unshed tears. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know I can't undo the years I stole from us. But if you'll let me, I would like to try being your father again. She looked at me, this broken man who had faced down an army of demons, all for her. The father she had mourned was alive, scarred, haunted, but here. My name is Clara now, she said softly, but with a strength that resonated deep within me. Clara Montgomery died in that saloon when you raised your hand. But maybe Emma Blackwood can learn to live again. As the sun set, painting the bruised sky in hues of orange and purple, we walked together, away from the reborn town, away from the ghosts of the past, toward the small, quiet farmhouse on the edge of town. It wasn't an ending. It was a beginning, built on the rubble of what had been broken, a chance to rebuild what we both thought was lost forever.